Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Excella-Bio. I'm with Dr. Anthony Hoffman, oncologist from the Bronx, New York, one of the co-founders of Excella-Bio, which is a CRO. He's also founder of Hoffman Oncology, which is his private practice. And today we're going to talk about research, drug development, and we're going to focus on inefficiencies in oncology studies. And there are many. And by the way, we shouldn't just single out oncology because there's inefficiencies in every indication across all trials. But oncology is always number one on the list just because there's the largest supply of clinical trials are oncology studies. And quite frankly, in my opinion, they're the most important. I mean, people's lives are on the line. Literally, people's lives are on the line in these studies. Unlike other studies where maybe future patients' lives are on the line, in oncology studies, the study participants themselves' lives are on the line. So welcome, Dr. Hoffman. Great to have you again.
Nice to see you, Dan. Thank you very much for having me again. And it's the kind of work that you're doing that's going to be helping in reducing the inefficiencies in the oncology studies, which unfortunately are many.
Tons.
And I think that if you look at there are so many statistics, but let's say, for instance, if you just look at one number, for instance, let's say you look at the amount of money that pharmaceutical companies have invested into non-performing startup sites over the last since 2000 from 2002 to 2010, it was almost $2 billion, and that is non-performing sites. And start up. So that means they have to go back, start up new sites, and get them to perform. And you waste a year and a half, and right there is your a major roadblock to your development. I think the other things. I mean, there are a number of other things. What do you find to be the the roadblocks when you begin a clinical trial?
Well, the first roadblock is finding the right site, quite honestly. A lot of times, especially with oncology, the physicians with the largest number of potential patients tend to be affiliated with universities and hospitals. And oftentimes, you don't want to work with those groups due to the local IRBs and the large bureaucracy that goes on in these organizations. And in some cases, you don't have a choice. You go with them. In other cases, you want to incorporate a healthy mix of academic sites, private industry sites. But the first bottleneck is really finding the appropriate site. You may have the appropriate investigator. You may have the greatest oncologist in the world. If he or she does not have a solid study coordinator, right, that's not a good site. So that's the biggest bottleneck from me in running my studies with my sites and my CRO, is finding the appropriate sites and then understanding their real patient population and their database, because everyone says they can recruit, but then nobody does. There's a reason why 90% of studies are behind on enrollment. That means only 10% of those who said they will enroll what they said they were going to enroll actually did it.
So that is that is a very tricky thing to do, because, for instance, you as the physician has a feel that the patients are there because he sees them every day, and he has a sense that the patients are there. He thinks he can enroll, and then when he gets to it, what are the items that get in the way? So I think some of the things that I see, are possibly the fact that some of the inclusion-exclusion criteria may be way too strict, and really are trying so hard to get the perfect patient in order to have the least amount of toxicity. Well, that's not the real world, obviously, and it doesn't help because, again, by trying to get this mythical patient, you end up spending a lot of time searching for the patient that never comes.
Right.
So that's one possibility. The other possibility, I think, that can get in the way is that the physicians, the scientists behind the trial, perhaps as an hypothesis, and the hypothesis is a good one, and for a number of reasons, the pharmaceutical initiates a whole number of phase 2 studies, kind of, to kind of thought-provoking, to stimulate more understanding about the effect of the drug. And what you end up seeing sometimes is that the medicine makes sense, the pathway makes sense, but the group insists on pursuing an indication or several indications, even though the early data clearly contradicts what the hypothesis is, and it ends up that there is a lot of futile clinical work that ends up being generated by this, because the pharmaceutical is, and the physicians and the clinical community is going after a particular indication for good reasons, not for necessarily for lucrative reasons, because the obviously are hard to treat or not treatable at all. So everybody wants to be able to come up with a medication that's going to have 30% activity, at least in one, liposarcoma. We have no drugs for liposarcoma. It's pathetic. So there is this perseverance after this potential indication, and you keep on generating more patients, more numbers, but that lead nowhere. Another possibility is that there is such a market demand, that this is where the lucrative aspect comes in, that the risk reward, even if it's marginal, obviously, if you have a disease without cure, even if you can cure 5% of the patients, you are the only one on the market with a drug that does make sense, even if you have to spend a little bit more to get there. So that's where I think, for instance, besides the site initiation and the site choice, it would be much better, for instance, to design a trial, for instance, like adaptive trials, where you're able to get an idea as to what is happening to the population. It needs to be built into the protocol at the beginning, obviously. You can't just make it up. But if you see that the particular indication or the way you're doing the trial is not working, you can back out and pursue a different arm of the trial that you built into the system in the beginning. So that has been a very interesting design. It's more complicated to design at the beginning because obviously you need to be able to kind of see into the future and say, okay, if it doesn't work like this, it may work like that, and we're going to switch over to this way. And obviously, all those permutations, you may not be able to think of the right permutation at the beginning, and you are kind of forced to go into the next option. But these, if you can combine dose escalation and dose expansion, you can move from phase 1 to phase 2 much faster, and you can evaluate several agents in several tumor types during the same program. In other words, only one contract, right? You don't waste your time 6 months, 8 months negotiating the contract with the pharmaceutical or the CRO, and you have one budget. Obviously, you need to be able to think through the trial. So there is a lot of upfront work,
Yes.
but then there is less time spending doing clinical trials, which means you save patients, right? So instead of doing 25 phase 2 studies that you need 500 patients, you may end up doing only 200 patients and come up with a lot more information. That way, the other 300 patients can participate in other projects. That's one thing that can be very helpful
And
in this.
why do you think that more studies are not adaptive protocols?
The adaptive design is relatively recent, and it does take this upfront work that it requires a group of people that have experience in adaptive design, and it requires a strong regulatory team, and the physician has to be familiar and be willing to work with the regulatory and biostatistician in order to arrive at a design that makes sense, that will allow you, in fact, to save time and patience. And so not all the in the past, it wasn't always the case, but now you see, because of the fact that we have so many targeted agents, in other words, drugs that are that are very specific for one specific target, which means that they may only apply to 1 out of 10 of the patients. So you are able to say, okay, we'll take 5 medications and 5 different types of this target, or maybe 5 different types of diseases, each with 5 different targets, and try in this way and that way until you get it right. So you expand the cohort once you find that there is activity, and obviously, because there is not going to be the toxicity since it's such a targeted agent.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously,
now with Excella-Bio, you have a team of regulatory affairs, individuals that regularly correspond with the FDA. Would you have to run this adaptive trial by the FDA and get their input, or do you just do it and then hope for the best? How does that work?
No. So there have been a number of important changes at the FDA, and I think that one of the things that's been very good has been the ability to communicate with the FDA as you're preparing your protocol, whether it's the pre-IND or pre-IND, or the protocol conference call while you're writing the protocol, so that it's no longer a game of oh, got you.
Okay.
You wrote it wrong. No, give me a sense as to whether or not I'm going the right direction. And the FDA is really concerned about protecting patients' safety, and also protecting the consumer, so that we don't approve drugs which are useless. But properly run, and I think that we have seen a significant change this past year with the new administration, including a lot of a removal of a lot of regulations that were redundant and not necessarily helpful. And the head of the FDA now seems to be a very, very powerful and strong person, intelligent. He's an oncologist. He has a feel for what the oncologists go through, what the oncology sector goes through in order to get a drug approved. And I think that he's been trying his best. Obviously, it just doesn't happen in 1 year, but I hope we're going to see a lot of good results. And I want to remind you that with immunotherapy, this is exactly the kind of project that we need, because we're going to have a toolbox of 35, 40, 100 types of small molecules, cell components, perhaps old-fashioned drugs, perhaps different types of metabolic medications, perhaps foods or substances that have an impact on the microbiome, for instance, which
Right.
has an effect on the immune system.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very possible that you may have 50 patients and say, okay, well, we're going to do 5 patients, we're going to change the microbiome this way. 5 changes, we're going to do it this way. 5 patients, we're going to do it that way. And then we're going to do these drugs based on the expression or non-expression of a certain biomarker. And once you have a solid footing in one direction, now you can expand the cohort to make it statistically significant. And this, I think, this is going to become a very big thing. And I have been trying to understand, because I'm just a doctor, but the how we can expand on this tool to really help us understand better the immunology, immunotherapy, the cancer response to the immune system, and the way that we use medications. Repurposing, very interesting concept. Now that we have a targeted world and an immune approach, repurposing old-fashioned drugs like, say, beta blockers may become an important thing.
Interesting.
So,
Yeah.
so there's bottlenecks. So we touched upon regulatory, clearly. We talked about contracting, a big problem. I was under the impression that there was several of the pharmaceuticals had gotten together to develop a standard contract that wouldn't need to be renegotiated every time. And I'm not familiar with how well this has been adopted, but I have used that contract in a couple of situations, and it cuts down legal costs, it cuts down time, and it makes a lot of sense to have a standard contract because it's the same story over and over and over again. We don't need to use 7 lawyers for 7 months to do the exact contract you did the last time.
Standard contract, and this would be a standard contract between the CRO or the sponsor and
it could be that it's a sponsor, the CRO, the site, the physician, the inventor. Standardize the legal forms so that we don't have to sit there and argue about, who's going to share the data. We know what pharma wants. We know what the investigator wants. We know what the CRO wants. Everybody wants the same thing all the time.
Right.
So, and at the end of the day, people have to negotiate and get whatever they can. So there's no reason to, as much as I love lawyers and I think they should make a lot of money,
right?
There's no reason to expand the legal community.
And I think that's why we're seeing this explosion of clinical trials in 2018. I mean, we're seeing this is going to be a record year when it comes to the number of clinical trials that are out there. Once again, oncology is top of that list.
What kind of numbers are you looking at, Dan?
So I just saw the numbers a couple months ago. So last year, there was, I think, and this is just United States, enrolling somewhere between 12 to 15,000 studies in the U.S. And
wow.
This year, they're expecting 18,000 or more.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, so it's a huge increase, and I'll check on the exact numbers and we'll put it in the show notes. But it's a significant increase in the study supply. We're seeing it at the site level. We're seeing a lot of pharma bringing back some of their CRO work back in-house or working with niche CROs like Excella, right, rather than the large CROs in the past, mainly because of the 2016 Good Clinical Practice revision, which mandate that the pharma, that the sponsor, take more oversight of the study. No longer can they just outsource to the CRO and say, hey, we don't know what's going on until we get the results. The FDA said, no, you can do that. You, just like the principal investigators have to have oversight, you, the sponsor, have to have oversight of your study. So we're seeing a lot of changes, but I think it's good and it's exciting for companies like Excella-Bio and companies like Hoffman Oncology.
And I think it's exciting for companies like you because I think that you have good ideas and the concept of really focusing on educating the CRAs and the study manager. And not only will it help decrease the costs, because I think the goal here, and I think you and I share this concept that it's not about really trying to squeeze as much profit as possible from one clinical activity. It's really about having as many clinical activities as possible, because the more clinical activities there are, the more medications we have, the more we can help people. And at the end of the day, that's what helps everybody.
That's right.
And what's lucrative is helping people.
Mm-hmm. That's the win-win environment.
Mm-hmm. Win-win environment.
So next interview, I want to get into immunotherapy. I know with Dr. Bruckner, we're going to be getting into some of that as well. Dr. Bruckner is also a critical investigator when it comes to Excella-Bio, and he has his own Bruckner Oncology, just like Hoffman Oncology. So we're going to get into immunotherapy, exosomes. Another thing I wanted to add when it comes to inefficiencies of clinical trials, specifically oncology, is it revolves around the regulatory components of a study. So there's something in research called a 1572 form.
Exactly.
And one box, I think it's box 6, has sub-investigators. Okay. Now, that's fine. You may be thinking, okay, the more sub-Is you put on, the better. Well, yes and no. So, yes, you have more resources, and you guys can collaborate and hopefully get more patients, and there's a lot of strength in numbers. The negative aspects of it are each time there's an amendment, everybody has to do retraining.
Mm-hmm.
Let me tell you, if you do this at a big university with 200 sub-investigators, you're not going to get compliance. You may get 150 of the sub-Is to do the training. And then the other 50 are missing in action. And by the time you get them, there's been another amendment. And maybe another, because there's like an average of 4 amendments per protocol now. So that's
amazing.
Mm-hmm.
An average of 4 amendments per protocol. So, these are the kind of things that, for some reason, the industry doesn't. Well, I know the reason, because obviously the more amendments, the more retraining, the more slides we have to make, the more the CRO has financial activity.
Mm-hmm.
But that bill eventually, But again, that doesn't help, because instead of spending the money into that, let's spend the money on doing the next study. Let's get another drug on the table. Let's cure more people. Since life expectancy has increased so much in breast cancer, I have a huge population of patients who basically I care for in survival mode, meaning complications and what it's like to be having had breast cancer 15 years before, and what things do I have to do to continue to protect myself and thrive, and that's a big part. And unfortunately, what we're seeing with the hospital systems is that kind of activity is not interesting to them financially, because obviously that means that you have to take a highly trained oncologist, and they need to be doing loving primary care.
Right.
Instead of referring patients for radiation and CAT scans, which is where the hospital makes money.
So many inefficiencies in Excella-Bio is trying to make tweaks and changes to the overall system, bit by bit. Eventually you're going to get there. Still a startup.
Well, I think this is an infectious startup, because I think that the physicians are out there who want to care for their patients, who want to be involved and want to make a dent. and I think we're going to see a movement develop. Dan, you're gonna be the leader of the revolution movement. We're going to
Exciting.
go. It's exciting. That's right.
That's right. Looking forward to it. And there's going to be, and we're going to, most importantly, we're going to be bringing the viewers of Excella-Bio and Hoffman Oncology along for the ride, and the listeners as
100%.
well, and the listeners.
100%.
And we
100%.
want to collaborate with you. So if you're watching or listening, and maybe you're interested in participating in research, if you're a physician, or maybe you're a CRA who wants to be help out in some aspect, we're looking to collaborate with the community. Patients, of course, we're looking to get a significant increase in enrollment, and not just our studies, but industry-wide. So if we don't have a study that's right for you, that Excella-Bio is managing, we'll point you in the right direction when it comes to finding
Absolutely.
studies.
That's a big thing. We love doing that. And, one of the with the targeting agents, for instance, like take next generation sequencing, when we take the DNA from the cancer cells and we check it against other drugs, it's become very common for the testing laboratory to provide a list of clinical trials where the patient can participate with that particular mutation. Mm-hmm. And I had a patient in October who had a mutation of the estrogen receptor, and I happened to know this site in Boston at Harvard. I called him up, and he saw the patient the next day. The following Monday, the patient was on trial.
You see, we need more of this. We need more industry collaborations. We need more paying it forward when it comes to this stuff. And of course, we're business. Excella-Bio's, this is a business, but at the end of the day, it's for the greater good of the industry. And I think that's what's important. And that's one of the reasons why we're promoting this channel and this podcast, and why we regularly have Dr. Hoffman, Dr. Bruckner. We're going to have other oncologists, other physicians on, other researchers on, CRAs, study coordinators. We're going to do it all. So this is just the beginning. We're going to have many more interviews. Thank you very much, Dr. Hoffman.
Thank you, Dan. And good luck with your proctoring session at the National Institute of Health.
Yes.
The incubator.
Yeah,
in Irvine, California.
NIH feed forward sessions. So these are companies, many biotechs that got funding by the NIH, and they're looking for mentors. They're looking for partnerships. I may have found somebody that a potential stakeholder for Excella. There's a couple of patient recruitment firms in the mix, and I know that's something that's always interested for clinical researchers. So we'll talk off the air, but exciting times for clinical research.
Terrific. Thank you so much for the time, and have a good day in California, and thank you for everybody for listening and for your leadership.
Thank you, Dr. Hoffman, and thank you, everyone, and make sure you subscribe and let us know any questions or comments you may have, and I'll relay them to Dr. Hoffman for you. Thank you, everybody.
Take care. Have a good evening.
You too.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.